Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending today's program, New BSA Officer Training. My name is Lauren Brown with the LBA. We are glad to have you with us this morning. I would like to go over a few business items before I turn the webinar over to your speaker. You should have received the materials for this program in an email last week and then again today. If you have not received the email or if you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, please call the LBA's main office line at 225-387-3282. Following today's program, you'll receive a follow-up email. If you have any comments and/or questions regarding today's program or topics of interest for future programs, please feel free to let us know by responding to that email. All participants are muted right now to eliminate the background noise. However, we very much encourage participation. If you would like to share questions or comments, please press *6 to unmute yourself. There's also a message box in the right corner of your webinar screen. You can type questions or comments that you may have there, and we will address them when we break for questions at the end. Now I would like to turn over today's webinar, New BSA Officer Training, over to your speaker, Debbie Crawford.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for that introduction. And today we're going to be talking kind of a good survey course on BSA, the Bank Secrecy Act, and your anti-money laundering program, which we now call AML, most of us. And as we go through this process, it is really designed for new BSA officers, but it's also a good review for those of you that have been at the job for a while. And as we look down the road towards BSA this year, just some things that are going on would be we are anticipating a new BSA exam manual probably this first quarter, and possibly the Illicit Cash Act, which would transfer beneficial ownership to the FinCEN, where we file CTRs, and also we're awaiting the Safe Banking Act, and we're hoping that Congress can get back to work and get some of these things passed that we all need done. So just know that it's shifting sands, right? We can talk about this all today and yet have changes as the year progresses, and that's just the nature of BSA. So one of the things I would recommend is that you go to the FinCEN.gov website, which is your friend, and take a look at any advisories that are recent advisories. That's also where you'll find the BSA law, the most current version of the exam manual, and you want to sign up, and so that they will let you know when any changes come, that you'll receive an email and make sure that your IT people let that email come through. And I would also do the same for the Office of Foreign Assets and Control. Those are probably the two big things that you're going to need to run a BSA department. So as you know, there are things that are in the exam manual that may not be in the regulations. So the two things that you kind of have side by side is your exam manual and your regulations. And when you break it down into sort of the 7 core elements of BSA, which every financial institution has to comply with, you'll see that there are a big section in the exam manual about risk assessments, not only the 5th pillar of risk assessing the account holder, the customer, but also building that into your overall bank BSA risk assessment for financial crimes. And it is not in the regulation, so that's where you'll see references to running a risk-based program and so forth. But the risk assessment itself is sort of a best practice, and it feels like it's a regulation because the examiners have gotten very, very serious about it. But the bank risk assessment is really not referred to except in the examination manual. Now you'll see in Section 1020, which is sort of the 4 pillars of BSA, a system of internal controls, independent testing for compliance to be conducted by bank personnel or an outside party, designation of an individual or individuals responsible for coordinating and monitoring day-to-day compliance. That's the BSA Officer Training. And then the fifth, which is a risk-based procedures for conducting ongoing customer due diligence to include but not be limited to understanding the nature and purpose of the customer relationship and conducting ongoing monitoring. So again, as we run and we continue to get guidance from FinCEN to run risk-based programs, and the new exam manual is supposed to be even more risk-based than previously, we are also noted that that's more a best practice, and it feels like a regulation, but the regulation where it talks about developing risk assessments are really more geared towards the customer. And I guess the idea is if you do a pretty good job on the customer, it feeds into those kind of big things that we have to do for the financial institution or for the bank. So again, the examination manual is pretty dated now. It's dated 2014. We added in the beneficial ownership rules and the customer due diligence rules, and so you'll see that in the one you got from us. But when you're talking about doing your overall bank risk assessment, you have to look at your products, your services, your geographies, your customers, and your transactions. And so this puts you in a position of really having to be in on, those marketing meetings. If you're not in on the first meeting, at least in the second meeting before they get too far down the road and we don't know whether we can handle the risk that's associated with that particular product or service or geography that you might be adding. And of course, this customer one, as we talked about earlier, is going to come out of the regulation, and it's going to feed into there, and that will always be shifting. Every time you risk assess a customer, every time you change a customer group at your bank, then you're going to be changing your overall risk assessment. So it's actually going to do a risk assessment about every 12 to 18 months. And that's probably a good number, probably every 12 months, probably a better number. And then you can be shifting and adding things to the risk assessment so that you have kind of the one you gave to the board of directors, and then you get one that's sort of fluid and you're working on for the next year. And so again, in adding transactions, and we're adding a lot of different transactions. I mean, people are using different methods of payment. There's a whole lot of more person-to-person payments. There's a lot more ACH. There continues to be the reduction in checks. So what does that look like as we go along? And I think here you probably need to do a pretty good job of defining what's a product, what's a service, what's a transaction, and what are we talking about by customers. And of course, geography is pretty self-explanatory, but we also look at geography in terms of like time and space. Like, why is somebody in Montana banking in Louisiana? Why are they using transactions or doing transactions at 3 a.m. in the morning? Things like that. Why are our customers depositing in ATMs in Colorado? So we do have to look at geography, not only just the parishes and the states and the counties that you're in, but also you have to tie it to those transactions, like when are those transactions happening, where are they happening, and with what customer groups, and why are they happening. And if it's logical, then it makes sense, then of course you're in a pretty good position. Otherwise, you're going to have to ask, a lot more whys. So we try to get to an executive summary. Somehow you have to look at your non-resident aliens, your politically exposed people, your embassies, your charities, your cash-intensive, your foreign business, your money service business, your marijuana-related businesses, however you break this thing down, and really look at how much exposure you have, like how many customers do you have, how much money is involved, how many accounts, what percentage of a particular branch, what is international, did we file CTRs, did we close accounts, things like that would be very important, I think, at the executive level. And then underneath it, you would have like a tab on each one of those groups. What are our inherent risks? What are our risk mitigations? And what are our residual risks? And, honestly, I was thinking the other day that probably the most fascinating area of this whole process right now is really the Office of Foreign Assets and Control. And if I had time and I was younger, I would probably focus on that area. All of those programs that we have with these foreign countries, these sanction programs. Today we have a president that uses sanctions more than any other president to get people to not only not go to war with them, but also to get them to the political negotiating table and trade deals and other things. So the fact that, we're having trouble with Russia, and we're having trouble with North Korea, and we're having trouble with Venezuela, and we're having trouble with Iran, it's on national news, and it's really very exciting stuff. But each country's sanctions program are different. So when we bring in non-resident aliens, we bring in the risk of OFAC sanctions because, again, most of them are non-resident aliens that would be on our OFAC list. And it really, it's just a fascinating area, but high risk. And I don't know if you've been tracking with any of the BSA type of news, but you might Google it after the program. But because Russia can't get money out, some of the Russians can't get money out through normal channels because of these sanctions, they have set up shell companies and are going into countries like the Baltic area where they wouldn't normally go. So you'll see, I think it was Swedish Bank and Danske Bank and some of those banks, and I may be mispronouncing their names, but there were some pretty big scandals about sanctioned money going through those financial institutions from Russia. And, again, man, what a hotbed of excitement and never a dull moment of what sanctions do and what really happens with them. But it's fascinating reading, and you can tell from the advisories that are coming out from FinCEN when you see geographic advisories, sort of what's that important thing that's going on. And particularly crimes. I don't know if you read or had a chance to read, but you might want to go back and read that guidance, that advisory that came out on fentanyl back in August, and it really goes through a lot of schemes that drug dealers use to move drugs into the country with mules and shell companies and all the different things, all the different payment mechanisms. So, our job is sort of an interesting job in that we have to become filters. Like I was changing all my air conditioning filters, and I was thinking, what a pain, that we have to do this. And but if we don't do it, then we end up with debris into our air conditioning systems, and they don't do a good job, and we all have sinus infections and all that kind of thing. So, and that's the way sort of BSA is we can't put enough law enforcement people on the ground to prevent a $2 trillion criminal enterprise. So the banks try to put filters on their money systems, and these filters are hopefully to filter out the debris of people trying to run illegal businesses like a marijuana business that's not legal, or internet gambling business that's not legal. And that's where the complexity comes, because, of course, there are some states where some things are legal and other states where other things are legal. So you not only have, what's financial crime in your particular country, but what's a financial crime in your particular state. So the FDIC back in 2015 was pretty distressed because community banks were like, okay, we're not banking money service business, we're not banking marijuana-related business, we're not banking hemp, we're not banking non-resident aliens because of risk. And so they came back and said, we'd really rather you bank a little bit of everything, but try to figure out what where you can live on the limb of the risk tree. So instead of saying I'm not going to bank, for example, money service businesses, check cashers, can I bank the Chicken Shack in Faraday because, it only cashes treasury checks and it only cashes local paychecks. And if it does cash treasury checks, how can we mitigate that risk? And we put all treasury checks under a black line before we accept their deposit to make sure that they turn purple. They actually, as treasury checks, turn almost an LSU purple, and then they have FMS on them. So, again, can you find a way to bank in your community and to take care of your community at the level of risk that makes sense for your financial institution? If you're a 10-branch bank, you don't need to be banking maybe something that is really high risk for your marketplace. And 10-branch bank. And if you're a 100-branch bank, again, looking at risk, you might be able to handle more risk, but you would probably have more internal controls to help manage and mitigate that risk. And that's part of it. When you become a BSA officer, you've got to go learn what's the new lingo. What are they talking about? And that's why we go to programs. Our BSA program that I teach is in March, and then of course you have your summer program coming up that another lady will be teaching. And, we go outside conferences and try to get out and, what is it that the regulators are on this year and what is the hot buttons that are important to them. And, and that's kind of where